Today, it's taken for granted that a driver who excels in NASCAR's lower divisions will one day get their chance to run full-time in the Cup Series. The only question is how well that driver will make the transition and how soon they will win. But there's one exceptional case of a driver who by all measures could and should have been a Cup regular for many years, yet for whatever reason he only enjoyed a brief but brilliant stay in the series, at the very twilight of his career. This is the story of Chuck Bown.
Chuck Bown, the Portland, Oregon driver, down the backstretch for one last time. Race number 16 in the 1991 Busch Grand National Series will go to Chuck Bown in the Nescafe Classic Pontiac.
Lady Luck certainly smiled on you this afternoon here at Myrtle Beach. It certainly is turning around your season.
Well, there's a long way to go yet in the second half, and if we can keep it rolling, we'll try to get back up there and give those point contenders a run for their money is what we hope to do.
Richard Charles Chuck Bown Jr. was born on February 22, 1954 in Portland, Oregon. He raced stock cars as far back as 1971, when he first competed in what is now the ARCA Menard Series West. He drove for his father Dick Bown, one of the West Series top drivers at the time, and turned his first laps at a second car that had been left in the grass outside the family's shop. By turning his first laps in heavy cars with limited braking and tons of horsepower, Bown learned how to manage his equipment. He got his first taste of Winston Cup competition in 1972 when he ran his first companion race at Riverside and finished 32nd in a field of 40. In 1976, Bown's father retired from racing to help him hone his skills. That year, Bown drove the Lakes Drywall Special, fielded by Gerald Craker, and with it scored his first West Series win and the championship. He won twice more in 77, and though he lost the championship to Bill Schmidt, still walked away with Most Popular Driver. He also married his wife Debbie, a registered nurse who happened to be the daughter of Hall of Fame driver Herschel McGriff. In 1978, the Bowns moved east as Chuck looked to make a name for himself in Winston Cup. By then, he'd driven his father's cars at Martinsville and Charlotte, then Craker's at Atlanta. Johnny Ray, who 2 years earlier gave Dale Earnhardt one of his first Winston Cup starts, entered his final 4 races with Bown as driver, but each time failed to finish. The next year, Bown teamed with Jim Testa from Kings Mountain and qualified for his first Daytona 500. As Donnie and Cale fought in the infield grass after their last lap crash, Bown finished 7th, and at the same track in July would best that run by taking 6th. But what looked to be a promising deal with Testa was soon scaled back, and Bown's performance struggled as he hopped from ride to ride, never once landing a steady sponsor. In between Saturday night features at Hickory, he worked every odd job he could find in racing, from a fabricator to selling tickets at Charlotte Motor Speedway. This wasn't enough, and there were times that Bown would literally go hungry. Bown's salvation came in 1982 when he got a call from Ken Squire. Squire got Bown in touch with U.S. Tobacco, who invited him to compete in the NASCAR North Series. Once called the Molson Tour, this was a NASCAR-sanctioned late-model sportsman series that raced on tracks in New England and Canada. With Skoal Tobacco as sponsor, Bown landed a ride with team owner Quinn Bovair, replacing a local legend in Beaver Dragon. Signed to a 1-year deal, Bown sold his Charlotte home and moved his family north to Franconia, New Hampshire. He never fully adjusted to the harsh winters nor the short racing schedule, but neither kept him from victory lane.
NASCAR North driver Chuck Bown talks about how he enjoys Skoal moist tobacco.
Barreling around the speedway is a tough way to make a living. It's hot, it's noisy, it's pressure. That's why after a race, you'll find me with my feet up and a pinch of Skoal between my cheek and gum.
In May, at the quarter-mile Monadnock Speedway in New Hampshire, Bown dominated, leading from flag to flag. He scored another 3 wins by season's end, then another 6 over the following 3 seasons. During this time, Bown was twice voted Most Popular Driver and became the first NASCAR driver to win with a V6 engine. He even won his 115th and final start at Vermont's Thunder Road, which placed him 3rd in the 1985 standings, trailing Robbie Crouch and series champion Randy LaJoie. In the summer of 1986, Bovair entered Bown in the open spec race at Oxford Plains, which included 42 other stars from NASCAR North, the Busch Series, and even Winston Cup veterans like Bobby Allison and Darrell Waltrip. In his 4 seasons running NASCAR North, Bown had already run 22 races at the 1/3 mile oval, earning 4 poles, but had never quite reached victory lane. This changed on July 14th as Bown led 72 of 330 laps on his way to victory. Since the Oxford race was listed on the Busch Grand National calendar, this became his first win in that series as well. Finishing 13th in that Oxford race was one of Virginia's most successful short trackers, Jimmy Hensley. Jimmy drove the number 63, entered by his father Hubert, who had been fielding race cars since 1952. In 1987, Jimmy left to drive for Sam Ard, leaving the driver's seat open for Canada's Larry Pollard, who scored Hensley Racing their first win at Langley Field. Instrumental in the breakthrough win was Jeff Hensley, Jimmy's brother, who after some difficult stints as a driver became the crew chief. Jeff remained atop the pit box for 1988 when Mike Swaim took over for Pollard, but after a winless season the two parted ways. Just like that, the Hensleys needed another driver. At the same time, Bown and Quint Bovair continued to dominate late-model sportsman racing up north. They now did so under the NASCAR Busch North Series, which in 1987 splintered off from the American-Canadian Tour, which ran super late models and pro stocks. Bown scored 2 more wins in '87, only to come just 5 points short of defeating Joey Corfus for the championship and ranked 4th in '88. In September of '88, as the Busch Series was in Dover, Bown reached out to the Hensleys about returning south. As with Bovair, the Hensleys only offered Bown a 1-year deal, but with it an opportunity to finally race full-time in the heart of NASCAR country. Funding his efforts in the NASCAR Busch Grand National Series was the most lucrative sponsor both driver and team had ever received, the Nestle Corporation. It was a deal too good to refuse. With that, the Bowns moved back south to Charlotte and prepared for 1989. The results were just as spectacular and instantaneous as they had been up north. From 1989 through 1991, no Busch Grand National car led more laps than Bown's bright red number 63 Nescafe Pontiac. He led 426 laps in '89, setting a record for most laps led by a winless driver, then stormed to 6 victories in 1990, all on the short tracks.
Chuck Bown just continues to march right through the field, right by everybody for victory.
Bown very close now behind Tommy Ellis in the 99. They were 5. Rick Mass's number 22 automobile. Ellis is 3rd. Bown's lapped everybody except the top 3.
This has got to be really gratifying for him because he has worked so long and so hard, has run so well on this circuit not to have a victory since the Oxford Main race several years ago on this circuit. Looks like he's going to end that drought here tonight.
Last trip around the 3/8 mile pavement here at Lanier Raceway. Bown working out of the second corner, smoking it down the backstretch, looking super strong. He'll take it easy behind Tommy Ellis. He'll come off the 4th turn. Bobby Scruggs checkered flag, and Chuck Bown is your winner.
It's been a long wait for Chuck Bown, but the drought is over. You found victory lane here at Lanier.
Finally, I was beginning to wonder. This team's run so strong since I come on board last year. The Nescafe Classic Pontiac's come that close to a victory so many times. And it's finally happened. We got the monkey off our back, and now I think we can do it a few more times. It was a whole lot of fun. Car work just super, and I'd like to say hello to Mom and Dad out there in Portland.
That year saw Bown dominate every statistical category: wins, poles, top 5s, and top 10s. He led 1,224 laps across 14 of the 31 races, nearly 1 lap led for every 5 he turned that year. He closed out the year as champion, securing the title at Rockingham with 1 race left to run. Curiously, he did so by beating Jimmy Hensley and the Don Beverly team by 200 points. 3 more wins came in 1991, where he sat 4th in the standings, and after a winless '92, he came back in '93 to claim his first grandfather clock at Martinsville.
Grissom right to his bumper at turn 2. Loosens him up just a little. Turn 3, this is it. Grissom on his tail. Bown off the corner. Grissom to the inside. Bown may be out of fuel. Grissom down and wins it.
Thank you, Glenn. I really appreciate it. We've had a long dry spell for us. Winning used to be pretty regular for the Nescafe Hensley Racing team, but boy, I tell you, we have had a long dry spell. I hope we never go through that again. But you know, the last couple races, we've come real close to winning. Got everything back on track. We're running strong, and we're looking forward to the future.
Bown could likely have kept the momentum going into 1994's Busch Series season, but he still wanted a shot at a full-time ride in Winston Cup. For all intents and purposes, he had earned it, Yet no matter how dominant he'd been in both NASCAR North and now the NASCAR Busch Series, the offers simply never came. There was a time where this was typical for drivers from the West Coast, but that time was ending as NASCAR was becoming a national sport. Bown seemed to be the only exception. From 1982 through 1989, he didn't make a single Cup start, and from 90 to 93, he only made 8 attempts and 5 starts. In 1990, he qualified for 3 races with Tex Powell, whose number 97 first brought Kellogg's sponsorship into NASCAR. In 1991, his only start came at North Wilkesboro, driving for Cale Yarborough, who would ultimately hire Jimmy Hensley the next spring. And in 1993, Bown qualified 10th at Phoenix, giving the Rouleau brothers their second-best qualifying effort they'd ever earned in the Cup Series. In all 5 of these starts, Bown finished under power and no worse than 26th. Yet still, he seemed no closer to a full-time Cup ride in the early 90s than he had a decade earlier. But behind the scenes, something was happening at 5254 Pit Road South in Harrisburg, North Carolina, home of Bobby Allison Motorsports. In October 1992, Allison hired Jimmy Spencer to drive his number 12 Raybestos Ford, which had languished without a victory for a 3rd straight season. Spencer finished 4th in his debut race at Charlotte, and finished no worse than 11th in the next 3 races. With new sponsorship from Meineke Mufflers and crew chief Jimmy Fenig, who won his first 2 races with Allison as driver, Mr. Excitement became a weekly contender in 1993. They didn't win, but finished 12th in points, with 5 top 5s and 10 top 10s, including a runner-up to Ernie Irvin at Talladega. But Spencer then left to replace Hut Strickland in Junior Johnson's second car. While the 94 season would produce Spencer's only 2 Cup wins, he'd also missed 2 races due to injury and ranked just 29th in points, and Spencer would never again finish as high in the standings as he had with Allison. With Spencer's success and the experience of both Allison and Fenig, the 40-year-old Bown seemed a natural fit. And so in November of 1993, as Chuck's younger brother Jim Bown took the controls of the number 63 in the Busch Series, Chuck Bown prepared to compete for the 1994 NASCAR Winston Cup Championship. He would technically do so as a rookie, though he wouldn't run rookie stripes as he'd already exhausted his eligibility in 1975 when Bruce Hill beat him for Rookie of the Year. "This is the opportunity I've been trying to make happen all of my career," said Bown. "My goal has always been Winston Cup. It took me a long time to finally get a full-time shot at it. At 12 years old, I knew what I wanted to do. It just took me until I was 40 to get here." For as long as the journey had been, Bown had actually started earlier than every full-time driver in the 1994 season, with the exception of 3 of the oldest, Dave Marcus, Morgan Shepherd, and Dick Trickle. "I felt I'd been ready for a long time," said Bown. "I felt I had the experience, and really kind of everything it takes, but for some reason I never really got any offers. I could write a book on almost as far back as 12 years ago. I'd come close to this deal or that deal with good teams, but for some reason or another, it never happened." This is not to say that Bown was bitter about having to wait so long. As Tom Stinson would write in his interview for NASCAR Scene, he was overjoyed. "That's just the way things went for me," he said. "On one hand, sure, I wish I was full-time with a solid team 15 years ago, but all the experiences I've had with all those different circuits, I wouldn't trade that for anything either. The experiences have been great, and I did finally get here. The results would prove surprising, both for the best and the worst." From the outset, Chuck Bown faced 3 challenges. The first, as always, was sponsorship. Allison had lost the Meineke sponsorship to rookie contender Joe Nemechek at Larry Hedrick's team. They didn't part on the best of terms. In April 1994, Meineke sued Allison's team over a $1,500 embroidery computer tape that was used to stitch the Meineke logo onto team uniforms. The team had held the tape as collateral, hoping to receive $2,700 in the extra cost of making those uniforms. Now there was very little to embroider, and Bown wore a uniform as plain and black as his Ford Thunderbird. In addition to Birmingham-based Big B Drugs, one of the team's only sponsors was an associate backer in Relife, whose logos were only on the lower quarter panels of the car. The sponsor, which joined when Spencer drove the previous March, carried particular significance to the team. Relife was a series of rehabilitation centers founded in 1986 by Michael Stevens, an Alabama native who started the company after his painful recovery from a spinal injury suffered in a diving accident. Relife's goal was to return their patients to living full lives, focusing on not only physical therapy, but also outpatient and community re-entry programs. Among Relife's patients was actor Gary Busey, following his head injury suffered in a motorcycle accident. Team owner Bobby Allison was a Relife patient as he visited the Lakeshore Rehabilitation Hospital to recuperate from his career-ending injury suffered at Pocono in 1988. It was this treatment that allowed him to return to NASCAR and supervise his team. Stevens felt the sponsorship would seem controversial in the dangerous world of racing, but Allison was proud to give them exposure. That loyalty would pay off. In September of '94, Relife would merge with HealthSouth, bringing its 46 facilities into national programs. HealthSouth would remain an associate sponsor of the Allison team for the rest of its existence. "When it comes to the business part of the business," said Allison, "it has always been the weakest part of my racing life. In the past, whenever there was a tough decision, and it seemed I needed to go win a race to keep the wolves away, I did. I went 2 years without winning a race during one stretch, and I was in the gutter. Then I went to Daytona and won the Daytona 500, and everything turned around." He continued, "But part of the problem now has been that I haven't done the things I used to do. After we lost Clifford, Davey helped keep me going. I sort of thrived on his success even when our team wasn't doing well. But when we lost Davey, I got even further away, and I haven't been able to make the contacts I could make up until '88 when I got hurt." The other challenge for Bown was the sheer depth of the entry lists. With the upcoming inaugural Brickyard 400 and a booming economy, there were more teams entered each week than there had been the last several years. In total, 70 drivers were on the preliminary entry list for the 1994 Daytona 500. That list was cut to 59 after several withdrawals, including the tragic deaths of both Neil Bonnet and Rodney Orr in separate practice crashes. With just 42 spots in Sunday's field, this still meant 17 others would be sent home after the 125-mile qualifying races on Thursday. Bown had raced his way into the 500 field in both 1979 and 1980, but had only once attempted the race since. In that 1991 running of the 125s driving for Tex Powell, Bown had only taken 24th in a 29-car field, out of the 500 entirely. Bown's return to the 125s didn't go much better, though he qualified a strong 14th in time trials with a lap of 188.021 miles per hour, placing him 7th on the grid for race 2. He was eliminated in a bizarre incident. On lap 34, Bown spun into the infield grass, which was so soaked from rain that he was stuck. A wrecker came to give him a push, only to get stuck as well. Without consulting the driver, the tow truck then turned around and deliberately backed into Bown's car. The push knocked Bown out of the muddy grass, but also destroyed the rear end, taking him out of the race for a distant 24th. "I was planning to come in and get 4 tires, make some chassis adjustments, and get back out there," said Bown, "but I never got the chance. The guy never asked me what I wanted to do. He just ran into the back of me. It surprised me." Fortunately, Bown's speed was still enough to get him into the race, and after extensive repairs, he started the 500 a distant 37th in a field of 42.
I say it's 34 years since there was not an Allison in this race. How do you feel about that?
Sad. Just, but a lot of people have helped me a lot, and at least I'm able to be here in the pit area. But it's a tough deal. It's been the great American race, and we've had a lot of good days here. And so, you do the best you can.
Well, you got trouble in turn 4. Major incident in turn 4. 7, 8 cars collected. Hut Strickland is in it. Kyle Petty involved.
Robert Presley was involved in it. Harry Gant is involved in it.
Well, I'm still in Bobby Allison's pit, and what a sad day for them. As he said, it's sad, and this is sad too. The car badly damaged both sides, all 4 wheels. As you can see, tires exploded there. Mechanics feverishly working away to pull the bodywork off the tires. They'll put 4 tires on. They'll go around and do another quick lap under the caution, then come back in and do some more work. This car needs a lot of work doing to it, and that will certainly knock the edge off it. As Chuck Bown goes out, And he'll be back again in just a few seconds when he's done one lap. Look at that tire, completely torn up. He must have spun this car around a couple of times.
This wreck on lap 64 was the day's biggest pileup in terms of car count. I got hit in the front and spun. Then Chuck Bown cut in front of me, and I got into him with my nose, said Kyle Petty. Then somebody else hit me. I would say who it was, but I would sound like sour grapes. While Petty was one of 4 drivers eliminated, Bown managed to get back out and finish the race just 2 laps down in 23rd. He did so fighting dehydration, as crush panels knocked loose from the Petty accident left him dizzy from the exhaust fumes. He was treated in the infield care center after the race. The next race at Rockingham was Bown's first Cup race at the track in more than 12 years. On November 1st, 1981, his father had fielded a Buick in the American 500. The younger Bown qualified 28th and finished there after mid-race engine trouble. This time, Bown qualified 25th on a day that still saw 49 drivers entered to attempt the 42-car field. Among those sent home were Ward Burton, who had also missed the Daytona 500, Jeremy Mayfield for the Sadler brothers, and even 1985 Indy 500 champion Danny Sullivan. Bown ran a respectable race. After 100 laps, he was running 17th. He was still 17th after 335, and over the next few laps climbed to 14th. But on lap 372, he tangled with Bobby Hamilton, pushing in the rear clip of his Ford. Just like at Daytona, Bown managed to still finish with a battered car, taking the checkers in 25th, 12 laps down. Despite the length of his career, Bown was still adjusting to running longer distances in Winston Cup races. These cars are a little heavier, have a little more power, and they react a little differently than the Busch Series car I've been in for the last 5 years, he said. I've been having a tough time deciding how I want the car to feel prior to the start. It's not that we can't achieve it, it's just that I'm having a hard time deciding whether I'm too tight or too loose. Next came Richmond, a track where Bown had made 9 starts in the Busch Series and won the pole the previous fall. When it was time to qualify for his first Cup race there, Bown put his car on the provisional pole. He ended up 3rd, beaten only by the Roush Racing teammates of Ted Musgrave and Mark Martin.
Going to row 2, there's Chuck Bown, the Bobby Allison car, and Rick Mast.
It was Bown's best ever start to that point, improving on his previous mark of 5th at Riverside back in 1975. Again, the list of DNQs was a story. 9 drivers were sent home, including Daytona 500 pole sitter Loy Allen Jr., Wally Dallenbach DNQ'd for Petty Enterprises, their first missed race since August 1989 at Bristol, and also Travis Carter's entry, the Camel Cigarettes Smokin' Joe's Ford of Hut Strickland. Still without a sponsor, Bown picked up Strickland's sponsor and would carry it in the race.
Well, that's true. You know, they got in the bind. We're helping them out, and in turn, they're helping us out. So hopefully we can do good with Smokin' Joe's today. But more importantly, hopefully we can get Bobby Allison Motorsports a full-time sponsor for the rest of the '94 season.
How good's the car, Chuck?
I think it's pretty darn good. I'm excited about this. Really looking forward to it.
The broadcast also featured Bobby Allison joining Rick Benjamin and commentating over one of Bown's pit stops.
And here comes Chuck Bown on the pit road. Let's go back to the STP pit center.
Bobby Allison, your car on pit road for its most recent pit stop. Are they going to change tires this time?
They're going to do a 4-tire stop. The guys have really worked hard to get that down pat. Our jack man got hurt in Daytona, and Scott Hewitt jacked him today. But all the guys worked really hard, and I'm proud of them.
Now, will they take a couple of turns and put a couple of turns of wedge in the car also?
Well, I didn't look at the thing close enough to see, but I know that they adjusted the tire pressure, and maybe that'll do the job.
Is that more what's needed today, just tire pressure, not so much the jacking bolts?
Well, it works different in about every track you go to, and sometimes different from one team to another team. But that's one of the ways that Jimmy Finnig has worked on the chassis for the guys, and you know, cranks and bite when they need to do that, but whatever.
He's been with you for a long time, I know. And Chuck Bown, you've got one of the great young drivers, I think, in this series.
Well, and I've known Chuck for quite a while. He's been in the Busch Series for quite a while, and I really like him a lot, and he's putting a good effort out, and we just hope that we can get everything working together.
We look forward to seeing you in victory lane before much longer. Bobby Allison, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you.
Bown finished 17th, 2 laps down, his best finish of the young season, but he never once contended for the lead. Atlanta came next, and with it a new one-race sponsor. Crown Fiber, which later that decade would sponsor local driver Buckshot Jones, jumped on board the black number 12. By this time, Allison put logos for his own souvenir business, Winner's Circle, which had franchises and shopping malls. Donka, a copy machine company, also paid for a small space on the B-pillar. They said, "Why don't you just quit and go home," said Allison, "but I refuse to be scared off by the wolves at the door. My people have done an incredible job, and nobody has come to me, worried about not getting a paycheck next week." With his piecemeal backing, Bown again impressed in qualifying, this time clocking in 9th for the Purelator 500, Wally Dallenbach failed to qualify the number 43 for a second straight race, one of 8 DNQs in a list that also included Buddy Baker. Bown looked for another strong run. He'd made 5 Cup starts at Atlanta, most recently the season finale in 1990, where he ran 23rd for Tex Powell. But this time it was a short afternoon. On lap 7, just as the caution fell for John Andretti's crash in turn 4, Bown's engine blew, putting him out of the race in 41st.
This legendary driver won here 5 times. With Bobby, it's been a short day for the Chuck Bown Ford Thunderbird.
Well, it really has. You know, the guys have worked so hard, and Chuck's done a nice job. And, you know, Relife and Big B and Crown Fiber helped us today. And, you know, just something went wrong.
Any idea what happened this morning? You changed an engine. You had a problem yesterday in the last session. You changed the motor this morning, and now you've lost the second one. Any idea what the problem might be?
Something went wrong with the engine, I guess. I'm not sure.
Bobby Allison, what a tough break for a great competitor.
The run dropped Bown from 21st in points to 28th. In 3 previous Cup starts at Darlington, Bown improved each time. His last start there came in the 1980 Southern 500, site of Terry Labonte's first Winston Cup win, where Bown drove Raymock Chevrolet to an 11th place finish. On the sponsorship front, Crown Fiber stayed on to sponsor the C-Post, while Lumberton, North Carolina's Ford dealership took the quarter panels. With this humble backing, Bown had another rocket ship in qualifying. For the second time in 3 races, he took the provisional pole and was one of 26 drivers to break the old track record. This time, he ended up 4th behind Bill Elliott, Sterling Marlin, and Mark Martin, his 3rd consecutive top 10 start at 3 radically different tracks. On lap 62 of the race, Bown was caught by both Bobby Labonte and Morgan Shepherd.
For position. Oh, Bown, a little sideways. Very sideways. Labonte crashes all 3 of those cars.
Labonte hits the inside wall very hard. Morgan Shepherd hit the outside wall. He has narrowed that Citgo Ford up some.
Here we go. Let's see what happened here.
We see Chuck Bown, and it looks like that his car just got high, and he couldn't get it down, and Bobby Labonte tries to go under him, and he gets sideways and just gets touched in the right rear by the 12 car. And meanwhile, Morgan's trying to dodge him all. He runs in the outside wall.
Yeah, Morgan shot up. He thought he had room on the outside. That was really his only alternative, and he got pinned into the wall. So there is right side damage to the Citgo Ford. And you see Morgan coming in now. The right front tire has already gone flat, and there's damage to the left front. You can see there as well.
Bown brought his car under control, only to face mechanical issues later on. "We shouldn't even have finished the race," he said. "The fan broke, and the water temp went to 265 degrees, and I had to back off. If the fan hadn't broken, and I had to back off, I'd have had a top 10 finish. But this is the best we've done, and we're happy." After running on the tail end of the lead lap in front of Dale Earnhardt, Bown did finish in 12th place, his new best finish of the season, his second in the top 20, and just 1 spot shy of tying his finish at the same track 14 years earlier. It was an impressive run, but in the days that followed, the team still hadn't landed a primary sponsor. And even when they did land one, the car wasn't repainted. Only simple white lettering was used. Allison's team seemed as overlooked as their driver. "I really thought we'd have a sponsor before the season even started," said Bown. "I find that surprising. This team has so much to offer. I just can't believe that in big-time motorsports they're not waiting in line or banging on our doors." While Bown had never even attempted a Cup race at Bristol, he had made 10 Busch Series starts there. During that time, he earned the pole in the summer of 1991, finished second the following year, and led a combined 122 laps across 3 of those starts. Even combined with his streak of 3 consecutive top 10 starts in the Cup Series, Bown was not considered a favorite for the pole. The Allison team hadn't tested at Bristol. A research and development program was among the many luxuries they simply couldn't afford. "We're on a budget," said Bown. But after drawing the 11th spot among the 42 entries, Bown stormed to the provisional pole for the third time in 4 races. "My first lap was close to a perfect lap, considering how tough this place is to make it happen," he said. "Going half a mile in 15 seconds makes it hard to do everything right and keep it smooth and fast, and I was able to do that in the first lap." Once again, Bown waited for someone else to beat his lap. Ernie Irvan, Mark Martin, Dale Earnhardt, Jeff Bodine, Darrell Waltrip. Out came Rusty Wallace, but even he was just 7 thousandths slower than Bown's black Ford. When the last car had gone, the 12 still stood atop the scoring pylon. For the first time in his series career, in his 54th start across 22 years, Chuck Bown had earned his first Winston Cup pole. For Bobby Allison, it was his first pole as a team owner since May 11, 1974 at Nashville. For Ford, it was their 6th in a row, continuing a shutout performance by the Thunderbirds in qualifying. And to sweeten the deal, it was also a new track record. Bown's lap of 124.946 miles per hour was more than 2 miles per hour faster than the previous record set by Alan Kulwicki in April of 1992. The accomplishment was all the more remarkable, as the field interval was so close in qualifying that 28 other drivers also beat Kulwicki's record. "I'm impressed," said Bown of his pole. "It seemed every track we go to, when we unload the car off the truck, it's fast. We've been knocking on the door to win a pole, and we've come close. But to finally do it, it feels just great. I'm happy and proud for everyone on this team." As Allison returned to his hauler after qualifying, a fan asked him for a picture or a postcard. "Hold on just a minute," he said. "We just got through winning the pole, but we're having some printed." Prior to the season, Mike "Grumpy" Culbertson and Keith Almond, the Allison team's truck driver and head engine builder, respectively, made a bet that if Chuck Bown won a pole early in the '94 season, they would paint their hair black with shoe polish. The two arrived the day after qualifying, with hair as black as their car. This Bristol race marked the 1-year anniversary of the plane crash that took Alan Kulwicki's life. Yet the track had no plans for a tribute, and journalist Joe Masenka noticed few fans wearing Kulwicki merchandise. Kulwicki also happened to be the last driver to win a pole in a Cup car without a primary sponsor. When he did so at Atlanta in 1991, he picked up sponsorship that weekend from Hooters, which came over in much the same way Camel Cigarettes had for Bown at Richmond. Kulwicki got the Hooters backing from Mark Stahl, who failed to qualify, and Kulwicki would famously win the Winston Cup championship with Hooters the next year. On this weekend in 1994, 5 drivers had failed to qualify, including the Hooters car, whose driver Loy Allen Jr. nearly crashed on his own qualifying lap, but bizarrely not one of these companies jumped to Bown's team. Instead, he landed 3 other backers: Masterbuilt, maker of the 7-in-1 Smoker, Hitch Hall, and the World Boxing Federation, or WBF. The WBF was founded by Bristol track president Larry Carrier, whose daughter Carolyn served as the PR representative for both Bown and Allison. There were reports that another potential major sponsor wanted to talk the following week. In the race, Bown was eligible to earn the Unical 76 bonus if he also won the race, which since its last claim in September 1993 had grown to $83,600. There was little coverage of Bown's pole in the broadcast. The start of the race was moved up due to the threat of rain. On the break, Rusty Wallace got the jump on Bown into the first corner and pulled out a big lead. Looking to track him back down, Bown did his best to hold the inside line.
There is a threat of rain here this afternoon. It's raining, we know, throughout almost the Midwest, making its way southeast, and we hope we can get all 500 laps in before this is
Mark Martin and Chuck Bown almost got together. Sorry, Bob.
And Ernie Irvan has been working on Jeff Gordon for the last few laps, too. Again, this is for second position. Bown has the spot. Mark Martin right there knocking on his door. He looks Bown spins.
And so far he hasn't did anything. He just keep it off the wall shut. Oh, man.
Just at the last minute, the left front of the car hit the wall in turn number 1, and Bown has damaged the machine.
Oh, that's too bad. One of the biggest days of his life here on Friday, winning the pole for this team.
got the Bobby Allison owned car headed in the right direction now.
But the left front tire is flat, and he's having all kinds of trouble. The left rear also flat. Here we watch Mark Martin come off the corner. He tries to get under Chuck Bown. He tries to, but he runs in the back of the 12 car. And Jeff Gordon gets by Mark Martin as he backs off the gas. And the 12 car thought maybe he's going to get away with it, but he goes up and smacks that left front.
Joe Nemechek narrowly missing him as the car slid down the banking. Here it is from another angle.
Just a little bit of a nudge. It didn't take a great deal. He spins down to the inside, and then is going to come back up across the track.
It was Bobby Labonte, wasn't it? The Maxwell House car that almost got into him.
And then Musgrave. But it's only a one-car incident involving Chuck Bown, who has made his way to his pit area now and actually is going to go behind the wall. Well, I thought he was, but I guess not. Jerry Punch is right there. Doc?
Unfortunately, Bob, heavy damage for Chuck Bown and Bobby Allison's Ford Thunderbird. The left front, the right front, the left rear. The tires are basically down and off the wheels, and Chuck did a great job just to get the car to turn off the racetrack. Now they have to pick the left side of the car up. The clearance is so minimal to the ground that there's no room to get the jack under the car if the tires are both flat. They get the jack beneath the car, left side tire, left rear tire going on. They're still looking at the left front fender area, trying to push some of the fender away. And heavy damage, a tough break for a young man who has put that car on the pole for the first time in his career. Bob?
All right, Jerry, the car about to roll away, but here it is from Mark Martin's in-car. And you can see Jeff Gordon go around Mark Martin to pick up the second position. So Bown is underway once again.
Bown never led that day. In fact, he'd be wrecked a second time, this time by Dale Earnhardt.
Green flag action with Jeff Bodine continuing to lead the way, and Chuck Bown spins in turn 2, and everybody hits the brakes, and several others become involved. Numerous others become involved, as a matter of fact, including Kyle Petty,
Terry Labonte, Steve Grissom, Brent Bodine,
Ted Musgrave.
What looks like a makeshift salvage yard here. Our pole sitter Chuck Bown's car here behind him, Terry Labonte. They're working on the Kellogg's car. Let me try to get in here without getting the steering wheel worked with. Chuck, what happened out there?
It's turning into an awful rough race, you know. All the guy has to do here is survive, and he's going to get a good finish, and I knew that going in, but it weren't to be. I got it early in the race by the 6 car and later in the race by the 3 car. It's just everybody's impatient and in a hurry.
How bad is the car hurt, Chuck? Can they get it fixed?
The first lick wasn't too bad, but this most recent one bent the trailing arm and rear end a little bit. We'll get back in the race, but we're so far behind now, we're just going to try to finish.
Best story in sports when an underdog overcomes adversity. He did it in qualifying to sit on the pole for the first time for Bobby Allison-owned racing team, but it looks like it's going to be a premature finish here at Bristol.
But just as he had so many times before, Bown finished the race under power, taking 23rd, 7 laps down. Even the pole at Bristol wasn't enough to reel in a primary sponsor for the following race at North Wilkesboro, where Masterbuilt scaled back to a small decal on the C-pillar. "We've talked a lot, and there's a lot of interest," said Allison. "It's just been a tough deal." Bown continued to do his job in qualifying, though for the first time in 5 races timed in outside the top 10. He still secured 21st on the grid, more than enough to escape a DNQ list of 10 drivers, including Joe Nemechek, Mike Skinner, Steve Grissom, and Jimmy Hensley. Bown's one-off for Cale Yarborough in 1991 had been his only previous Cup start at Wilkesboro. 3 years later, he was riding toward a 15th place finish when the engine let go past the halfway point, leaving him in 35th. Next came Martinsville, where Bown won his 11th and most recent Busch Grand National Series race the previous fall. The track remained much more elusive for the Allison family. In 73 combined attempts, neither Bobby, Donnie, nor Davey Allison ever won a Cup Series race there. Adding to an already challenging qualifying session where 44 drivers entered for just 36 available spots was a slick track surface. Caused by the biased ply tires used by the All-Pro Series that weekend, this made life miserable for any driver who didn't stand on their time from Friday's first round, held before the race. Nearly all who tried went slower. Among the 8 DNQs were Wally Dallenbach, already his 3rd in 8 races, Chuck's brother Jim Bown, and in a massive upset, Harry Gant, the lone DNQ of his farewell tour. Had Gant stood on his time from Friday, he would have made the field in 31st position. "It doesn't feel all that bad to miss a race," said Gant. "At least we tried. We knew it would be a tough field when we got here. It would have looked bad to stand on our time and still not make it. It was a tough decision. We just made the wrong one. I guess I'll go home and watch it on TV." This marked the first race without Gant in the field since 1990, when his father passed away. It was Gant's first DNQ since at least 1979. Bown almost missed the field himself by running the second round. "The stuff they put down made the track real slick," he said. "He lost about 0.4 of a second per lap to that stuff. I would have bet anything after practice that I'd run faster than I had Friday. I just couldn't get a grip on the track. I suspected it might be slick, but not like that." He took the last provisional spot to start 36th, placing his crew on the track's dreaded backstretch pit lane, a notorious disadvantage at this and other similarly configured tracks like Bristol and Darlington. To maintain his track position, Bown would have to race twice as hard from the very start, and he would do exactly that. During the race, Bown climbed to 28th on lap 65, 19th on lap 126, 14th on lap 175, and 11th by lap 200. A fast pit stop on lap 230 jumped him to 8th when ESPN's cameras first noticed him.
Go on the pits and put up the exhaust pipe or something. Boy, hats off to this guy. A great run from 36th starting position. He's been as high as 8th. Currently is in 10th position.
Bown then stayed in the top 10, and Dr. Jerry Punch shared a special story about the team's struggles.
12 car, Chuck Bown continues to impress me. He's in 6th.
Took a provisional to get in the deal.
Yeah,
having a great run here today.
And Jerry Punch has more on Chuck Bown's drive today.
Gentlemen, actually it's Bobby Allison. A touching incident took place here on Friday. A youngster about 9 or 10 years old by the name of Chris came up to Bobby Allison and said, "Mr. Allison," and Bobby looked down and the youngster had two hands in front of him full of coins and single-dollar bills all wadded up. He said, "I know you don't have a sponsor. This is the money I saved from shoveling snow all winter. I want you to have it because I want to help your race teams." Bobby said he was almost in tears. He said, "You know, the future of our country is in the hands of today's youth, and the future looks very bright."
The child's donation led to the founding of the Friends of Bobby Allison Fund in Taylor, Pennsylvania, where fans could make their own donations to the team. But on May 5th, the Allison team publicly discouraged this. "While we are sincerely appreciative of all the efforts," read a prepared statement from the team, "we do not endorse the race fans spending their hard-earned money toward our racing endeavor. We prefer the fans support those sponsors in racing in hopes their support will encourage other companies to become involved. Again, we thank the fans for their continued interest and support." In the closing laps of the Martinsville race, Bown bounced off the wall in turn 2, then again off turn 4, but he still climbed past Rick Mast with 28 laps to go.
Chuck Bown, of course, has put many laps on this track in Busch racing, and he has just turned in an outstanding performance this afternoon in Bobby Allison's car.
"I think I messed the suspension up on the car," said Bown. "It was really good the first half, but the second half it just kept getting loose on me in the long runs. I think it just got the rear end or the toe end knocked out of whack. We were pretty loose." Bown took the checkered flag in 7th, his best finish since his career best on the 4th of July, 1979. "We finally ran a race and stayed on the lead lap. We were pretty darn competitive, so I'm really happy with the run," he said. As he was interviewed, he was nursing his feet, though he did so with a smile. "It'll be all right. I don't think it'll blister. I burned it so many times through the years, there's nothing left to blister. It's all scars."
Had a real good run at Martinsville. We finished 7th, but at that time it had a front stretch and a backstretch pit, and I qualified poorly. We had to pit on the backstretch. The one time we qualified poorly. And boy, we were fast the whole day and passed more cars than anybody, but you know, you were at the back on every restart. And every time there's a caution, we come in and get tires. We were at the back because everybody else was on the front stretch and got a big advantage. They've fixed all that now, but you know, this is 1994.
There was still no big money sponsor waiting for the big race at Talladega, right in the Alabama gang's backyard. By now, there were rumors the team would close down altogether. "The only thing I can go by is what Bobby Allison said Bown. "He said we are going to race. We're going to have to be a bit more conservative and tighten our belts a bit more than we would like, but we're going to have tires, engines, and a good pit crew. We just aren't going to have any luxuries." Big B Drugs rejoined as the listed sponsor. Several others did join the effort. Among these were Vulcan Lincoln Mercury and Bengal Roach and Ant Spray. The car even had mismatched quarter panel sponsors, Cavalier Homes on the driver's side and Buccaneer Home Builders on the passenger side. Returning to the side of Jimmy Spencer's runner-up finish for the team a year earlier, Bown qualified a strong 14th, sending home the likes of Ward Burton and the Melling Racing entry with Rich Bickle. Unlike Bristol, he wasn't shaken out of the lead pack so easily and remained in 10th on lap 8. On lap 104, Bown missed a spectacular crash in the tri-oval, where Mark Martin crashed through a chain-link fence in the infield. He took the restart, only to be involved in the next big wreck.
Harry Labonte and Rusty Wallace and Harry Gant and others are involved. And this is going to involve more cars than the previous crash. A big cloud of dust down by turn number 1, and we can't see a thing. We're going to have to go to our aerial shot to give you an idea of how many cars are involved. 3, 6, 9, 12 at least. Wow. Terry Labonte was the first to get sideways, and there his car is, along with Derry Cope and Jeff Purvis. Wally Dallenbach, Dick Trickle, Jeremy Mayfield. There's Chuck Bown, Rusty Wallace. Boy, we went so long in this race with no cautions and no accidents, and now 2 major ones here within a few minutes.
Just like Daytona, the team managed to piece the car back together, and Bown finished the race under power, 20 laps down, in 27th. I distinctly remember seeing Bown's picture in the program for the Save Mart Supermarkets 300 at Sears Point, still in his Busch uniform with no sponsor listed for his Ford. The Press Democrat, our local paper, used to publish these annotated starting lineups with a brief statement about each driver's chances for victory. Bown needed a provisional to make the show, securing 41st on a grid of 43. The paper gave him 700-to-1 odds, and noted next to his name a single statistic, 57 Cup starts, 36 DNFs. While true, this was only part of the story. For example, Bown was one of 55 drivers entered for that 43-car field, including 13 Winston West drivers for one of the last companion races held in Cup Series history. While Bown had never before raced at Sonoma, he had made 13 starts at Riverside, and even once ran on Breyer Motorsports Park, the grassy road course that once occupied the land now held by the New Hampshire Motor Speedway.
We're back on the throttle real hard here as we head toward turn 6, which is a dogleg to the right hand. You work the car over to the left and you throw it over to the right, drop the right side wheels just off the pavement, try to straighten it up as much as you can. You don't have to downshift. Now we're headed into turn number 7. This is a slick one right here. See the shine on the pavement? It's really slick. You aim the left front wheel for that rock there, right there. Just try to just miss it, come off that corner. Now you get set up for the last corner, turn number 8. A right-hander, you put the right-hand tires right off the racetrack in the dirt there, and you're wide open here on the home stretch, headed for the checkered flag.
In the race, Bown reached 29th on lap 29, then 21st on lap 44. He was still 21st at the finish, the first car 1 lap down to Ernie Irvan, gaining 20 spots without major incident. It would be his 5th best finish of the entire season. Next came Bown's first ever start in the qualifier for the All-Star race, then called the Winston Select Open. There, he received still another one-race sponsor in Southeastern Industrial Plating, a Statesville, North Carolina business that put its logo on the hood of his black Ford. After qualifying 15th, this logo would get more screen time than anyone anticipated.
Oh, Marcus!
Oh, easy.
No! On his roof, Chuck Bown.
Bown was up on his roof there for a second.
And comes sliding down the speedway.
Running in the middle lane, just a couple car lengths behind Marcus, Bown had nowhere to go but into the back of Harry Gant. Then, after contact from Loy Allen, was ramped up onto the driver's side of Todd Bodine. Bown's car slid on its side, then bounced down the banking back onto 4 wheels, where it was left smoldering in the infield grass. The driver climbed out under his own power, but for the first time all season his car was completely destroyed, finishing in 29th place. This time, Bown did manage to get some attention. For the first time, landed a 2-race sponsor in Teletron, which sold prepaid phone cards. Also joining the effort was Overton's, which at the time often backed unsponsored entries running the race in Charlotte. Lumberton Ford also rejoined for the first time since Darlington. With these backers, Bown qualified 20th on a much shorter entry list, one which only sent home Jimmy Hensley, Dave Marcus, Bobby Hillin, and Jim Sauter. In the race, which saw Jeff Gordon score his first career victory, Bown shook off his crash from the open, and in a different car, climbed as high as 10th. He finished 13th, his best run since Martinsville. Even fewer cars made the trip to Dover the following week, where Bown qualified 35th as Norm Benning and Andy Belmont missed the cut. With Teletron back on board, he started to gain positions before contact from a sliding Mike Wallace pinned him into the turn 2 wall.
Third, in the wall, Chuck Bown. The Teletron number 12 of Bobby Allison has got itself wrinkled up pretty good. We're going to stay green. NASCAR has officials on the backstretch to check for debris there. They report none, so we're staying green.
Well, he has a little bit of problem there. You see the left front caved in there. He must have got into somebody and then got to the outside wall because the whole nose of it's pushed in.
Buddy, as we were talking, I looked at the 90 car of Mike Wallace when he passed. If we get a view of Mike's right rear, I believe him. It looks to me like Chuck maybe got in the wall, came down into Mike's right rear, and we don't have a caution, so there must not be no debris on the track.
Once again, the Allison team's cars proved resilient, and Bown finished the race 21st, 18 laps down to Rusty Wallace. Bown now ranked 24th in points as the series headed to Pennsylvania for the UAW GM Teamwork 500. It was at Pocono in 1988 that Bobby Allison suffered his career-ending crash when his tire blew on his first trip through the tunnel turn. Here again in 92 that his son Davey was sent sailing through the infield grass in one of the worst accidents of his career. And not even 1 year earlier, this was the first Cup race run after Davey's passing, the Robert Yates team withdrawn from the field in grief. Back at the track with the same Relife sponsorship that came about after Bobby's accident, Chuck Bown hoped to earn a solid finish at his first start at the track since 1980. Local sponsors joined once more. Precision Restaurant Services of Walnutport, plus the Blue Ridge Service Center in Palmerton, both based about 30 miles south of the Pocono track. Winnebago bought space on the TV panel. But just like Martinsville, the team lacked speed in qualifying, rolling off in the final row alongside Bob Keselowski, who on this day made his only Cup Series start in a one-off for Jimmy Means. Andy Belmont was again on the short list of DNQs, this time joined by rookie Billy Standridge. In the race, Bown lost ground early when he slowed with a flat right front tire. Heading into turn 1 on lap 57, he was caught by Sterling Marlin.
Trouble in turn 1, one car hits the wall hard. Chuck Bown and Sterling Marlin get together.
That looked like when Chuck Bown went down in the corner. He backed out a little bit. Sterling went in just a little bit harder, and he made very little light contact getting in the corner. That got Bown a little bit sideways, and he got in the right rear corner and could not get away from the car. Then both of them just went up and slammed into the wall.
Yeah, I was lucky because it would, it knocked me out. They were extracting me with the jaws of life, and evidently the noise of those trying to separate the roll cage to lift me out woke me up, and climbed out in my own power. I was a little groggy, but climbed out in my own power, and they airlifted me to the Lehigh Valley Hospital and kept me overnight. But I was very lucky. I didn't have any bleeding or swelling of the brain, but rung my bell a little bit.
Can I ask you what started that wreck? Because the video, it's hard to tell. It's you and Sterling Marlin, and off you go head on into the wall.
Yeah, it's one of those things where Pocono was a tire eater as well, and Sterling had just been in and got fresh rubber, and I was out there on old rubber. I hadn't made a pit stop yet, and I think he was just way faster and probably didn't realize it getting into the first turn, which is fast turn at the end of that long front straightaway, and he got into the back of me, and I got sideways and overcorrected a little bit, and when that happened, he got into me a second time. Didn't mean to, I'm sure, but it just turned me driver's side into the wall pretty hard. It broke the roll cage, it broke everything, and it about broke me.
Chuck Bown has climbed out of the car on his own, and that's great news.
Yes.
They did cut a bar or two out to aid him in getting out of there, and wipes off his face and is going to get a ride to the care center. But boy, it's good news to see that he is okay. Forget this stretcher, guys. I'm walking in.
All right, that's great.
That's great news.
Well, I like to say this as delicately as possible. Chuck Bown did walk out of the ambulance into the infield care center. They're looking him over. They decided for precautionary reasons they are going to take him out in the chopper over my shoulder. The chopper over my shoulder. They're going to take him to Lehigh Hospital and further examine Chuck Bown. Of course, in this business, to take a hard lick that Chuck Bown did, they said he's still very, very woozy, and they just want to make sure that he's okay. So they're going to take him to the hospital and check him out. But they're going to take him out of here in the chopper.
Good point, Randy. You can't be too careful. I mean, when you impact the wall at 160 miles an hour, certainly every precaution should be taken.
With no apparent injuries, he was still kept overnight for observation. After his release on Monday, Bown was later diagnosed with a concussion, a broken left ankle, and a broken right wrist. The wrist injury wasn't discovered until his personal doctor checked him out 2 days after the crash. Bown got a special cast at Methodist Hospital in Indianapolis that would have allowed him to race, not unlike the cast that Davey Allison tested in Andy Belmont's car after his Pocono crash in '92. But Bown also had issues with his vision stemming from the concussion. At Michigan on June 17th, he tried to get in the car for opening practice, but had to get out as he complained of double vision. "We've had some bad breaks," said Allison. "The CAT scans didn't show anything, but Chucky hasn't been feeling the way he's used to. We're hoping that Chuck gets to feeling better. We're kind of just taking it week to week right now. We certainly didn't need this to happen. I don't think the accidents have had anything to do with us not having sponsorship. We're really trying to get some sponsorship." For the Michigan race, where Teletron had returned for a third time as sponsor, along with new backer First of America Bank, Allison met with defending ARCA champion Tim Steele over lunch and offered him the ride. It wasn't the first time the two had crossed paths. Steele had driven Davey Allison's Busch car after Davey's death the previous summer and credited Davey for his decision to run ARCA in the first place. So when Bobby arrived, Steele jumped at the chance and qualified 29th for his Winston Cup debut, but he wrecked on lap 63. "We got 3 wide up there, and I ended up getting into the loose stuff," said Steele. "This is one of those things that you learn from. You don't want to make the mistake twice." Said Allison, "We're going to try and get everything back together and go from here. We're hoping that Chuck gets over this quickly. We're glad that Tim will race for us. We're hoping for the best." Steele drove the 12 car again in Daytona, and Bown was expected to return for the following race in Loudon. But on July 9th, the day before the race, Allison made a difficult decision. "We have been looking for a sponsor for almost a year, and we need a sponsor now to keep this team operating at full strength," he said. "We feel it would be easier to go to a potential sponsor with a driver we know will be able to drive the car. We wish Chuck Bown a lot of success. He did a real good job for us, and if we had a sponsor now, I'm sure we would be able to wait for him to fully recover." By the 11th, Tim Steele officially became Bown's replacement at Bobby Allison Motorsports. Though his vision was improving, Bown supported the decision, saying Steele had more sponsor money to bring to the table. At Loudon, Steele started last, crashed, and finished in 41st. He'd run no better than 33rd in his remaining starts with the team.
It was quite an honor to get to drive for, one of the greatest of all time, really. I just wish we'd had sponsorship. We're on a pretty tight budget for a Cup team by Cup standards. He had some owners that spent a little money and help fund the team, but we never really got the solid sponsorship. But we were pretty fast, and I was loving it, but it just didn't last long enough. I got that wreck at Pocono, and it kind of set me back.
When the Cup Series returned to Pocono in July, Bown tried his hand at broadcasting.
Standing by with us today in the STP Pit Communications Center, a guy we're more used to seeing behind the wheel, but it's good to have Chuck Bown here.
Thank you, Gary. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, a few weeks ago, you ran in this race, and this track bit you. That's why you're here today with an injured foot, injured hand. This track has changed a lot.
It really has. This is 5 weeks later. It's hotter. They've run 3 preliminary races already. It's going to be slick. And the slick track experts, Dale Earnhardt and Randy's with him.
And Tim Steele has rejoined the race in car number 12. I understand Bobby and Judy Allison were home this weekend watching. The car was doing a little better out here, Robert Vance, but he's out here giving it a good show and plenty of laps down. He was in the garage area for some time. He's only completed 63 laps. Tim Steele, who took over from Chuck Bown after that horrible crash he had here in turn number 1 back in June. New colors on that car. Jimmy Henning and company. hoping to have a good day.
Bown landed another ride for 1995, but wouldn't get to run the Busch Clash he'd earned for his pole at Bristol. His next Winston Cup race came on March 26, 1995 at Darlington. By then, Derek Cope had become Allison's full-time driver. Cope came on board at Watkins Glen in August of '94, 1 week after he qualified for the Brickyard 400 while Tim Steele did not. It was Cope who brought the elusive sponsorship from Straight Arrow Mane and Tail, and in that Darlington race finished a strong 5th. With yet another full-time driver, Bobby Allison Motorsports was now a weekly contender, just as they had been with Bown in '94 and Spencer in '93. In '95, Cope would claim 8 top 10s and finished 15th in points, 3 spots better than when he scored both his wins in 1990. But that's a story for another time. Bown, meanwhile, had signed with Dean Myers to drive the number 32 Active Trucking Chevrolet, previously piloted by Jimmy Horton and Dick Trickle. He failed to qualify for 2 of his first 4 attempts, then ran no better than 21st. In 1996, he made another 6 attempts with the Sadler brothers, including the Daytona 500 and the Winston Open. He finished 16th of the 25 drivers in his 125-mile qualifier, but missed the field for his 5th and final 500 attempt. He made just 3 more Cup races through the season's first half, bringing his career total to 73 Cup starts. That same year, Bobby Allison closed his Winston Cup team. Jimmy Fenig wouldn't win another race as crew chief until May 4th, 1997 at Sears Point, when he called the shots for Mark Martin at Roush.
In fact, I actually raced another 5 years, but boy, it bounced around a lot from a lot of different rides, and it just seemed like I was the scapegoat. If things weren't going good, the team was struggling, or they weren't great teams, and so then I'd get the boot, and I think it just kind of hurt my reputation some, but I was getting it done as far as I was concerned, but for what I had, but that's my opinion, I guess. Yeah, it's tough. You just keep hoping that people realize what you're up against and see the talent and better opportunities will come. But and then it's always a hard call. Would I go back to the Busch Series and try to get a better car there? Or because to me, the whole thing was you got to be up front. You got to win races. You got to be competitive. And, I didn't want to just be out there mid-packer. It didn't interest me. I mean, I did it a lot because I didn't have a choice. But, I didn't want to make a career of that.
Late in the '95 season, Bown made his return to the Busch Series. Just his second start for Key Motorsports, he qualified 38th of 44 cars at Charlotte, and charged to finish an impressive 9th, leading 2 laps along the way. By 1999, he'd reunited with Hubert Hensley, and right away finished 11th in his old number 63, now sponsored by Exxon. From there, he led 12 laps at Las Vegas, 5 at Nazareth, then in his return to Charlotte paced the field for 23 laps on his way to a 7th place finish. But driver and team soon parted ways. It was a similar story in the Truck Series, where in 1997 he finished 9th in points driving for Jack Roush. In '98, Bown won the pole for Roush at the Walt Disney World Speedway, but this would be his last start for the team. He'd make just 8 starts after, 35 truck starts to his 187 in Busch.
When I stopped driving, I never really said, I'm retiring or I'm done. My phone just quit ringing. Good opportunities weren't coming. Now, people were still calling, but it was some real junk. And I knew I'd kill myself trying to take 40th place cars to the front. And I just didn't want to go down that road. So, I didn't accept those. If anything good would have called, I'd have went in a heartbeat, but nothing good came along. So I'm still waiting.
Chuck Bown's story has always fascinated me as one of the storylines overshadowed by all the events of the 1994 season. The first Brickyard 400, Dale Earnhardt's 7th championship, the tragedies at Daytona, Ernie Irvin's injury, Hoosier's final stand in the tire war. Even his final practice at Michigan occurred on the same day as O.J. Simpson's Bronco chase. No diecast was ever made of his number 12. The only 1994 version of the Bobby Allison car was when Matchbox produced Derek Cope's Straight Arrow Ford. Bown is also one of NASCAR's what-ifs. What if he hadn't been injured at Pocono and finished the season? Would the Allison team have landed a sponsor, finished in the top 5, or even won? Would Bobby Allison Motorsports have stayed in business longer? Would Bown have stayed in the Cup Series or gone back to Busch? And if so, how would he have changed the records there? What do you think? Tell me your thoughts in the comments below, and thank you for watching.
In America, there exists a sport that is driven by the fans. They are why everyone works so hard, on the teams and at the tracks, in front of the grandstands and behind the scenes, to give the fans the greatest race possible. NASCAR fans deserve the best, starting from the high banks of Daytona, all the way to the shores of California, and at every race in between. NASCAR fans, you're the reason for our success. Thanks.